This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer?
Experts in the Wire, episode 20. Tom Critchlow. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 20 of Experts in the Wire. This is a very special show for me, episode 20, not only because 20 episodes is kind of a small milestone, but because I've got Tom Critchlow on the show today. And Tom is one of the first people I ever met in the SEO industry. And today, Tom's going to talk about what it was like working for Google, why it's important to escape the SEO vacuum, what it was like meeting Sergey Brin from Google, mistakes that startups make, and a lot more. But before we get into that, I want to tell you the quick story of how I met Tom. Now, let's rewind to 2011. I have no money. This is because I am, at that time, transitioning from being a piano teacher, a poor piano teacher, to doing SEO and getting my SEO company off the ground. So the summer of 2011, we were broke. And I happened to win a ticket to the Affiliate Summit in New York. Now, this was going to be my first kind of big conference in the industry that I would attend. So I find the cheapest bus from Boston, and for food, I boiled some eggs and put them in a plastic bag. I must have smelled terrible. I must have seemed homeless. And I grabbed a bag of stale cookies that I had gotten from my father-in-law's a few days before. That was kind of my meals, right, for like the day while I was traveling. I shoved them in my pockets, hopped on the bus, go to New York. And even though I met some really great people at the conference itself, there were some people in the SEO industry in New York that I wanted to meet that were not at the conference, such as Will Reynolds, Mike King, John Doherty, and of course, Tom Critchlow. I had all kind of met them a little on Twitter, interacted with them a little, but never met them in person, and never really met any SEOs that I looked up to in person. So I somehow figured out they were all going to dinner one night, and I sort of got invited, maybe kind of invited myself, to be honest, to kind of go to this dinner. And I think John Doherty was the only one that knew that I would be attending. So I kind of show up to meet John, and one by one, everyone kind of comes in and sits down. We're at a big, like a round circular table, and everyone besides John's kind of looking at me like, who is this weird guy we don't know that just kind of showed up at dinner? I probably still have the boiled eggs in my pocket, still smelling terrible a day later. And all I remember, though, is Tom walked in, sat down right next to me, to the right side of me. And I had known Tom from Moz and Distilled and so forth. He didn't know me at all. And I turned to him and I said, hey, I just want to say thanks for all the content that you contribute, all the help you provide, the videos you make, to kind of help everyone in the SEO community. And I really appreciate that. And to which point he was thankful. And we struck up what must have been a 45-minute conversation where Tom very generously talked to me about business, SEO, blogging advice. I had not yet started blogging at that time. And I just remember that clear as day, how just genuine and helpful Tom was. That's just the kind of guy he is. And I'm telling you all this, not only for the backstory of how I know Tom, but because I think you'll find him to be exactly of that character today in today's conversation. Just a genuine, nice, helpful guy where you're going to learn a lot. I think he's going to give a lot of kind of background information, behind the scenes stuff from Google that other people might not talk about. And just in general, what a great guy. So Tom, it's great to have you on the show today. And I hope everyone enjoys episode 20 of Experts on the Wire. I've really just had the tape rolling, and I'll kind of like start it at a point that makes sense, that won't bore the audience. Right. And I really just want to jump in because a lot of people have known you from the industry in the past. Your talk at MozCon in 2012, which I saw, which you had one slide, and that was very impressive. And, you kind of stepped away from the industry for a while. You worked at Google. Now you have Fiercely Curious, and you're doing so update all of us. I mean, some of us haven't really heard from you in a while or talked to you very much. So tell us what's been going on with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes actually when I went to Google was kind of cutting off my social media presence a little. I think I'm not quite sure what reason I had for retreating. But there was a period of about a year, I'd say, when I wasn't really on Twitter so much. I wasn't blogging, and I was really kind of head down trying to get work done at Google. That was kind of a mistake. I don't really know why I needed that sabbatical time, but certainly I think it kind of, a lot of people forgot about me during that time. And then I think when I come back, I think that talk at MozCon, going to work at Google, and then branching out both into the art business, but also into my freelance consulting. I've really been trying to move away from pure SEO work. I think for a long time, working at my brother's company, Distilled, for a long time, we were very well known in the SEO space, and that was great. I all of that work was amazing, and Distilled is a really great company. But I felt like it was time for a change, and that was what really instigated me going to Google in the first place. Was kind of go and get a bit of a broader experience in digital marketing. Work on some more creative things. I ran a TV ad campaign while I was at Google, so that that's the kind of experience that I was looking for. Was something completely different, something creative, and I got that. So I was at Google for a couple of years, and then about 18 months ago, I branched out on my own, started doing freelance consulting while also running Fiercely Curious, which is an art business that I run with my partner, Aaron. And then, as we alluded to earlier, I just had a baby 3 weeks ago. So that's obviously my latest project, my latest startup, which is right now cash negative with no with no foreseeable revenue source in sight.
We've all been there at some point. So, and you covered a lot of time and things in that ground of what you just said. So I want to jump back to a few of those. So one thing very interestingly that you mentioned was kind of regretting stepping away from social. So there must have been a value or perceived value or even just enjoyment that social media provided to you throughout the years. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail? Like, what did being on social do for you?
Yeah. And when I say social, it really encompasses a lot of different channels, everything from blogging to hanging out in forums and comments, and as well as obviously traditional social like Twitter and Facebook. I think that whole system for me has just been so rich in making connections, in helping learn about new things, and really kind of has just added a lot of value, both personally and professionally. I've met incredible friends through social, but I've also had incredible professional experiences, whether that's job opportunities or conference speaking or whatnot. And I think part of that comes from a little bit of nostalgia in a sense. I think all of us in the SEO industry got onto Twitter pretty early. I think I've had a Twitter account for 10 years now.
Wow.
And I remember back in the day when the only people on Twitter were friends, basically. We just kind of hang out. It was like one big forum, and it's kind of evolved since then. But I still think that there is a really delightful kind of serendipitous, spontaneous kind of set of connections and introductions and interactions that can happen on social. And that isn't to say that it doesn't also get in the way sometimes. I'm a big fan of trying to disconnect as well and have some real life experiences. Certainly with close friends and family, and trying to put away our phones and so on. But there's a time and place, and I think that what I've really valued from social over the years has been those random connections, those spontaneous, moments that have come up. And that's really been a big deal for me. So, I think it's always striking a balance between passively engaging in a kind of, not necessarily a constructive way versus actively contributing, so I always like to try and make sure that I'm contributing, whether that's blogging or even just commenting on other people's blog posts or whatever. That's a lot harder, obviously, than just kind of passively, watching the stream scroll by. But I think both are important, and for me, it's been an incredible influence.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to touch a little bit upon what you mentioned about going to Google, going to work for Google. You said something very interesting to me, which is one reason why I think I've always kind of liked your content and your approach to SEO, because you said you wanted to get away from SEO and kind of expand beyond that. And I've noticed this thing, and I'm sure you've noticed as well, all the people that really do SEO very well tend to kind of be interested in other things or have a bigger mindset than just this kind of SEO vacuum or tunnel vision. So talk to me a little bit more about that. And what could you advise anybody listening that does SEO or is interested in SEO to maybe use a more holistic or bigger approach like that, incorporating that into the SEO that they do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's two factors going on there in what you mentioned. I think certainly a lot of the quote unquote old guard are kind of branching out above and beyond or expanding past pure SEO. And I think there's really two things bundled up there. One is that no one got into SEO for SEO's sake, right? Everyone had a diverse background. Mike King is a great example. He was, traveling, kind of internationally acclaimed rap star. Happened to get in an accident, was in hospital, and was like, "What can I do at a computer?" Picked up some SEO stuff. People don't get into this or didn't get into this industry because it was a kind of defined space. It was much more of the everyone that got into the industry was coming in as a kind of in-betweener, an outsider, kind of a ragtag circus band of folks who were just curious about the web and how it worked. So that's one factor that I don't think no one was really set on SEO in the first place. It was just, it happened to be a thing that people picked up and were interested in. The second factor was that, if you rewind the web back to, say, 2010-ish, there was a brief moment when SEOs really ruled the web. Google was just this unstoppable juggernaut in driving acquisition and eyeballs online, and SEOs are the ones that knew how to play in that space. And traditional ad agencies, PR agencies were still trying to catch up. They were still lagging behind. And so the people that had been working in SEO for a few years, by that time, they had some experience, they had some clients, they had some reputation. And I remember that I was working at Distilled at the time. We would have clients come to us and we would get almost unparalleled opportunity to work on the web. We could work on web projects across a huge range of things, whether that's content, whether it's social, whether it's creative, whether it's analytics, whether it's whatever it was. SEOs kind of ruled the kingdom in a sense. But that quickly shifted as the traditional agencies and media properties woke up. Ad agencies, creative agencies, PR agencies, digital agencies, all of these different competitors also woke up to the web. So they became web native, web savvy, and so it wasn't that SEO is not dead, SEO has not died. But there is a notion, I think, that the people that used to work in SEO and the projects that we used to have is now carved up across a greater number of folks. And so people that do branding online are branding specialists. People that do ad campaigns online are ad specialists, and so the people that know SEO, you still have core SEO projects, but we don't rule a kingdom like we used to. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you see, quote unquote, the old guard moving on or branching out, is because we had experience in a whole bunch of other things. We got a taste of what it was like to work on a range of web projects, of creative projects. And so, I think there's a notion that we're all kind of moving on, trying to capture a bit more of that spirit, a bit more of that influence, because ultimately, I think Google has got a lot more sophisticated. Search is a slightly less dominant channel. And I think SEO is a slightly more, this is going to upset some people. I think SEO is a slightly more boring space than it used to be, which is not to say that it's less complicated or less technically sophisticated. There are still plenty of, ins and outs and things that you need to know. And it's still a dominant channel for a lot of websites, but it's not what it was back in 2010, 2011.
So to add on to that a little bit, you kind of skirted around this. Can you describe for some of the listeners how you view SEO as fitting into the overall digital landscape right now? You kind of like circled around it, but put it in your perspective where it fits in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, certainly. So I was just chatting with my brother this morning, actually. We were we were having a conversation about whether Facebook or Google was the dominant traffic source on the internet, and Will was having a Twitter conversation with Ben Thompson, who runs the email newsletter Stratechery, which you should subscribe to if you don't. And Ben Thompson was basically saying that Facebook is the dominant traffic source on the web, and Will and I were kind of scratching our heads saying, wait a second, that's not true. Google is still the dominant traffic source on the web. That's not to say that Facebook might not eclipse them at some point, and it's certainly true that Facebook is the dominant traffic source for a lot of media companies. But in terms of where search fits in, I think that, again, back in 2010-ish, search as an independent discipline was more clearly defined. In today's environment, especially given that most technical platforms are, pretty SEO compliant. Most of the kind of technical kinks have been ironed out. A lot of people either use WordPress or they have their own custom CMS that Google can crawl just fine. I think the emphasis now has shifted much more towards kind of two parallel disciplines of research, which kind of encompasses all that we used to do under things like keyword research and personas and so on. But it's also more than just keyword research. It's also about actually kind of user experience. It's about user needs, conversion rate optimization. And then there's content, which is about, how do you put out content on the web that meets those needs? And that, again, is a broader discipline of content strategy of what content are you making, who's making it, and why, and for what channels. So that encompasses everything from video to kind of how-to FAQ content, as well as more, I guess, traditional SEO content of guides and so on and so forth. So I see SEO, like if you actually look at a lot of big retailers, for example, a lot of e-commerce sites on the web, they will have a small SEO department that kind of runs SEO nuts and bolts, SEO initiatives, and yet most of the actual work, quote unquote, most of the output is handled by either marketing teams, content teams, merchandising teams, acquisition teams, and so on. And so, SEO as a discipline to kind of rule over everything is not so much true anymore, and it's more so true that I think you need some SEO expertise somewhere in your organization. But it can be spread across multiple different teams, and it isn't necessarily driving top-line initiatives so much as supporting them.
Yeah, I kind of view SEO as being a layer that goes on top of all the different things, the PR, the content, all those aspects. Yeah, absolutely. So you've now had almost every experience I could think of categorically. You've worked for an agency. You helped run the New York office of Distilled, of the agency.
Correct.
You've gone and worked for a big company, Google. You now kind of run your own thing. You run an e-commerce site, essentially, Fiercely Curious. So can you give us kind of a quick rundown of each in terms of pros and cons, like from the perspective of somebody considering working in any of those scenarios? What are kinds of the pros and cons that you saw in each situation?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, first things first, although I've worked at an agency and at a big company, they're all different. So I will do my best to generalize, but bear in mind that these don't always hold true. I think that working at an agency gives you a really good kind of crash course, like a fast immersion in a broad range of things. Pretty much no matter what agency you're working at, unless you're stuck on an account that only has one client, which can happen at kind of certainly big ad agencies and so on, where one client can kind of dominate the budgets. Assuming that's not true, assuming you get to work on a range of clients, you just get such a fast immersion into different industries, different niches, different organizational approaches, different budgets, different strategies. And that can be amazing early in your career. I think, going to work at an agency, getting a little bit of agency experience can really help you just get a handle on how things are done in different places. And I think that can be really informative. It's one of the things that I see often. A lot of young folks that used to come work at Distilled would get frustrated with clients. They say, well, why isn't the client doing X? And you really have to have a little bit of experience and have dealt with a number of different clients to really understand why most clients don't do that or aren't able to do it as fast as you would like or as easily as you would like. And instead of getting frustrated at that, I've always relished the challenge of understanding truly why things aren't getting done and really getting to the root of how you would get them done in some kind of environment. So I think agencies are a really great environment to get a kind of a good cross-section of different industries and different styles, different approaches, different clients. Agencies can also be incredible places to build your own reputation. Agencies love to have people speaking at conferences, blogging, guest posting, podcasting, all of that kind of stuff. So again, early in your career, it can be an incredible way to build a reputation. I think Distilled, more than anything, actually is one of the best agencies out there at doing that. John Doherty, who used to work at Distilled alongside me, just wrote a post recently about the Distilled alumni and some of the incredible places that we've all gone on to, and some of the incredible projects we've all gone on to work on, and kind of looking at why Distilled was such a great place for that. And I think that some of that actually comes down to the way that we copied Moz. In the early days, Distilled really tried to follow the Moz model of kind of transparency, always giving away knowledge, blogging all the time. We run our own conferences and so on. And so that's a phenomenal environment for somebody early in their career to get a boost, basically, right? Get their name on the map. the contrast to that, working in-house, and obviously working at Google in-house is a little different to a lot of places, but I think it holds true is that in-house you get to go deep on things in a way that you can't in an agency environment. So, when you're in-house, you typically have a much smaller number of projects. You have initiatives that typically span multi-year horizons. So, again, at an agency, you might say, why hasn't my client redesigned their website? It looks like it's old and outdated. And actually, the client might be in the process of redesigning the website, but that might be a 2-year project, right? That's not a small initiative. And so I think if you're going to go in-house, I think you have to go in with your eyes open and with the notion that you should see some projects through, which will take a couple of years, right? So it's a much longer time horizon, a much kind of bigger window to think about as you go in-house. And typically I think that you'll get a little bit less access to external networking. So, social blogging, conference speaking, and so on. Again, not universally true, but for the most part, I think people in-house typically get a little bit less access to that. But you contrast that to you can build an incredible network internally at the company. Certainly at Google, I made a lot of friends, made a lot of contacts internally within the company, which have really helped me out afterwards as well. So that can be a big benefit to going in-house, and you get deep experience in one sector, one niche, one industry, which again can be really helpful. And then contrast all of that to the freelance life, which is kind of the third way, if you like. Again, there isn't really a kind of formula for that because everyone does it a little bit differently. The one thing that I will say is I wouldn't recommend anybody go out on their own unless they already have some kind of network. Whether that's a strong network from being in-house somewhere, or whether it's a strong network from being at an agency somewhere, or however you've gained that reputation. That's been by far the biggest kind of asset that I've had as I've gone out and working on my own, is just having an incredible kind of surrounding of friends, colleagues, acquaintances, people on social that have passed me work, have stuck up for me, retweeted my blog posts, all that kind of stuff. That whole network of both kind of close but also loose contacts has really helped me, get clients and get work. So that's a little bit of a summary. But again, there's no real generalizable formula, I don't think. But that's certainly my experience.
Are there any kind of drastic lifestyle differences that each of those cater to?
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, it's hard to generalize. I think Distilled, as an agency, it typically has a really good work-life balance. That's not necessarily true with a lot of agencies. A lot of agencies kind of work you really hard. Converse that to where, I almost had the opposite experience when I went in-house at Google. I worked for a team called the Creative Lab, which is like a little ad agency inside Google. And the work-life balance was terrible there. But contrast that to the rest of Google, where typically the work-life balance is really good. So I think it depends very much on the place that you go to. Certainly, I found that being out on my own freelance has been the best balance for me, which I think I would say that I've shifted from a kind of a 5-day work day, five-day work week to a 7-day work week, but that it's on my terms, and I can take time off when I want. I don't have to count my holiday days. It's been a much kind of more, overall, a much more relaxed environment, even though at times, obviously, it gets stressful and, I have to work plenty of weekends. They're all done under my own kind of volition, which is nice.
Totally. So let's spend maybe 2 minutes on Google, what you did for Google. The question on everyone's mind, and probably mine as well, is: did you meet Larry Page? Did you shake his hand?
I didn't meet Larry Page. I did bump into Sergey Brin, literally, rounded a corner.
Physically bumped into him.
Physically walked into him. He's small. He's smaller than you might think, but incredibly well built. I think he works out a lot. So I think I came off worse from that interaction. But I didn't meet Larry. I had work that was presented to Larry, but I never actually was in the meeting with him, unfortunately. So I wish I had been. But.
How isolated were you as a team operating from the rest of Google? And I guess how is that throughout the structure of Google? I've heard that all the teams are very isolated. Like analytics doesn't talk to the webmaster team and so forth.
Yeah, I think it very much depends on the team. It's a huge company, so there are lots of different pockets that you can get kind of stuck in, if you like. And there are definitely some political divisions, less so now, I think, but certainly a few years ago. For example, Andy Rubin, who used to run the Android department, who founded Android and used to run Android, was an incredibly abrasive character, and really ring-fenced the Android team from the rest of Google. So Android was an entirely kind of distinct entity for a long time, really up until about 2 years ago, I think, when he stepped down and Sundar took over both Chrome and Android, and Sundar is now obviously CEO. So Android is much more heavily integrated into the rest of Google, and I think we'll probably see some big announcements around that I/O coming up in a few weeks. But as to how isolated we were, well, it was interesting. The Creative Lab intentionally isolates themselves because they didn't want to be. They wanted to think differently than the rest of Google. It's a very design-driven, creative team, which is very different than the kind of analytical, engineering-heavy culture at Google. And so they intentionally kind of ring-fence themselves. The Creative Lab is actually on like a separate floor in the office. They have their own like environment, and they're almost in a physical bubble. But the flip side of that is that they try really hard to integrate with a wide variety of different teams. So one of the things the Creative Lab used to do was look for kind of small initiatives, small projects that were coming out of the other teams. So for example, the search team might have some little R&D projects going on, and the Creative Lab would look at those R&D projects and say, these are interesting, these are exciting, we can do things with these. And so they would work with the other teams as like a partnership to either run some marketing campaign or just do some branding, design, prototyping, whatever, to kind of bring those to life. So it was kind of I think the Creative Lab was both isolated but also very well connected.
Is there anything that you're allowed to say that you can point to and say, I worked on that?
So there's it was a marketing campaign for Google Plus called Maker Camp.
Maker Camp.
Yeah, Maker Camp.
We'll link to it in the show notes. Yep.
Yeah, which it ran for the first time in 2011. I led the initiative in 2012. That was a TV ad campaign that I ran. It was basically a partnership with Make Magazine, which runs all kinds of like DIY and kind of hobby making projects. And so we ran this kind of campaign for kids. And so it was kind of a STEM education thing that ran over the summer. 6 weeks of content and live video on Google Plus. And it was kind of a collaboration between the Creative Lab at Google, the Google Plus team at Google, and Make Magazine. So it was kind of three stakeholders, and we sat in the middle trying to organize and coerce everyone to do it. So that was the big public-facing campaign that I ran. There's been a bunch of other bits and pieces that have kind of bled out into the world. And so when I left the Creative Lab, I was working at Google for about 2 years, and the project that I ran after I left the Creative Lab was virtual reality. So I worked on the Google Cardboard team.
That's right. Yep.
So that virtual reality stuff, I kind of helped do some marketing for that, which is in some senses the easiest job in the world because everyone wanted Google Cardboard. Everyone wanted to integrate and partner and so on. So that was kind of a really fun project. But for the most part, a lot of the projects that I worked on never saw the light of day, which is actually a big frustration that I had with the Creative Lab was they did a lot of They did a lot of prototyping in Photoshop. So they would create a lot of beautiful things, beautiful objects that were highly impractical or dysfunctional in practice. And so would never see the light of day because the engineering team or a product team would take one look at it and be like, we don't know what to do with this. It's made up, but it's make believe.
An interesting thought hits me. Like, do you think if you were at Apple, that would have been something where somebody like the character like Steve Jobs would have just pushed and pushed and pushed to make it happen, to like make it something that worked? Or are these things that were literally physically impossible to?
No. I mean, I think for the most part, a lot of the things that the Creative Lab dreamed up were just impractical. They were kind of misguided in the sense that they were products that people didn't want, or there were things that people didn't want to interact in that way.
Okay.
I think there were certainly some things where I think, a strong visionary or whatever could have pushed it through. And there were plenty of things that the Creative Lab worked on that do see the light of day. One of the guys, Jonathan Jarvis, that I used to work with there, he led the redesign and rebrand of Google that happened recently. So, right. That saw the light of day in a very public and a high profile way. But a lot of the product experiments didn't see the light of day, which again is fine. I mean, they're an R&D lab. There's going to be a lot of experiments and innovations that don't make it. But that was frustrating for me because I feel like I had a bit more of a technical background than a lot of folks there, and I had a much more of a mindset of iterating, of getting customer feedback, of trying to prototype and test in a bit more concrete way. And there was a lot of just Photoshop mocks floating around,
right. So
which I didn't think was the most effective way of getting things done.
You were surrounded by maybe a lot of idea people that didn't have the practicality sense to it as well.
Yeah, I think so, and that's not to badmouth anyone there, because there's some incredibly talented people there. But I think certainly that was one of the weakest points of the Creative Lab was just kind of being surrounded, and it wasn't even necessarily idea people so much as just an aversion to building things. They very much wanted to design and make things that look pretty rather than make things that were functional.
So what did you physically do on a day-to-day basis? Were you in Photoshop? Were you typing up documents? Like what were you doing?
Just presentations all day long.
Really? So
pretty much. So, my role was basically as kind of project lead. So I would lead projects of all kinds of different sizes and formats. I would run ad campaigns. I would run internal product R&D experiments, all kinds of different things. And so as kind of project lead, that encompasses everything from pitching the idea, getting the buy-in, getting budget, presenting, reviews to senior management, presenting back to the product team to kind of convince them of why what we're doing is exciting or interesting to them. So a lot of presentations, a lot of meetings, a lot of kind of the business side of things. I didn't spend any time in Photoshop. I was surrounded by designers and videographers and copywriters who were just the best in the business. So I was kind of very much not the person who was capable of doing any of that stuff. So my job there really was kind of support the talent, if you like, the real creative talent in the Creative Lab, just kind of help them get stuff done, whatever that means, whether that's in a production capacity or a kind of advisory capacity, or just kind of helping move the business goals forward. That was mostly what I did. But a lot of presentations. Got it.
Cool. I always wondered what you did, just day by day. So it's been great getting updated on all this stuff. I haven't talked to you for a while, so that's been nice. I want to shift kind of the general second half of the conversation to kind of let's give some marketers advice type of stuff. So, and I have some questions here and some topics I want to jump around to, but I want to start with something you said a few minutes ago about giving away content. It's the whole Moz or the Distilled philosophy about giving, and you'll receive from that. But can you explain a little bit more about that? You said that actually in an interview from Below the Fold, you said that giving away was a secret sauce and that giving away knowledge was much more valuable. Can you explain a little bit more about that philosophy and maybe tie it into tangible results that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, certainly my experience at Distilled was that the more that we gave away knowledge and content and insights and data, that really did two things for us. One, it kind of cemented our reputation as industry leaders or people that knew what they were talking about. But two, it also meant that we came up in any conversation that referenced that topic, right? So for example, one of the most probably kind of high profile things that I did from a kind of blogging perspective at Distilled was I helped write the import XML guide.
But right before you said that, I knew you were going to say that because it stuck with me for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, well, because a lot of people reference it, and actually, I wasn't necessarily the person to come up with the idea. Rich Baxter at SEO Gadget, I think, initially kind of twigged me on to the whole concept. They're not called SEO Gadget anymore. Built Visible is his company now. Yep. But it was one of the things that I took him around with it, and I had a lot of fun, and I was curious about how it worked, and so I found it really useful in my day to day. I wrote a bunch of kind of blog posts and topics about it, both for Moz and for Distilled, and what that did was it kind of cemented our brand and our reputation. Not to mention the fact that up until pretty recently we ranked number 1 for import XML. When you put it in Google, I don't know if we still do. We might do, but that was kind of a tangible example of where by not just putting out content, but also by kind of cementing your brand, the idea that people associate those concepts together. It means that you come up with a lot of conversations and get referenced a lot by a lot of third parties, which is just good for traffic, but also good for getting clients. So, I think that we saw a lot of success with giving away specific kind of vertical topics. So, I'm trying to think of a good example, but at Distilled, we used to talk about, for example, how to do certain things in the SEO travel space. As one example, that would almost always at least lead to some interesting conversations with travel clients, whether we actually get new clients or whatever. You realize that people who are in the travel space read everything there is to know about it, and so if you put something out there that's interesting, you get those people coming to you and talking.
Or even
to you.
more specifically, you did how I would do SEO for Hipmunk, a specific brand.
And that was a great example. So I wrote that for Moz. This was in 2011, I think. I wrote a blog post, how I would do SEO for Hipmunk.com, and they were a client 4 months later.
That happened to me twice.
Yeah, I mean, like a very tangible. I mean, that's kind of an incredible kind of like direct kind of lead gen approach to blogging.
So how is this different than like what you said, just blogging, or just so? What's the nuance that listeners can catch between giving away content and just simply blogging by rote, like which is what a lot of people do? What does that spirit kind of have in it that does something that makes you do something special?
I don't know if I do anything special, to be honest with you.
Well, not you, but that people that give away content like Moz or Distilled, like what's because a lot of people publish content now, but a lot of people miss that spirit of giving it away, and then it shows in the results of what they publish.
Well, yeah, I think Moz has been an incredible kind of poster child for that, in a sense of radical transparency pays off. The idea of like giving away more than the next company or the next guy, and saying, we're actually going to be transparent. We're actually going to give you numbers, whether that's revenue numbers or traffic numbers or whatever. That just helps you stand out. I think that helps you get a reputation and helps people take notice.
And Buffer's been really good with that too.
Buffer's been really great at that. That's really helped them out. Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much anytime you give away more than people typically give away, you stand out, right? And so I think that's one of the things that I think people should do more, is try and stand out. And I think that one of the key traits of somebody that is good at blogging is often reading a lot of other blogs, because you want to have a sense for what is already out there, what are people writing about, what is the stuff that fits in, and what is the stuff that stands out. And if you can stand out in whatever way whatever that means, whether that's the format of what you're writing, the style, the tone, or the data that you're sharing. If you know what stands out and you can go and write that, then that really helps.
So maybe to connect this to, not to interrupt, but I want to connect it to like something other than an SEO or service industry. Let's say you run an e-commerce site, like maybe you're a bigger company with like lots of distribution. Would an example be is if you found like some hack to like distributing or to managing your inventory or something like that, and then publishing that? Is that like a good parallel example?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, there isn't really a set. By definition, there's no set formula for standing out. Because if there was, then you wouldn't be standing out anymore. I think I know this example gets referenced a ton, but I think Dollar Shave Club was a really good example with the video that they made. That isn't to say by any stretch that that's easy to replicate. But what I mean is that content in that sense and standing out can mean all kinds of different things. When Dollar Shave Club made that video, it stood out. I mean, it was an entirely new kind of format. It felt very fresh. Again, I think BuzzFeed does this really well. So Facebook Live video is kind of a new thing right now. And rather than doing something that you might expect, BuzzFeed went and exploded a watermelon using rubber bands live on a live stream. I think they had like 1 million concurrent streams or something ridiculous of people just watching a watermelon about to explode. But that demonstrates just the style of thinking, the approach to standing out. Again, there isn't a formula for it, but I think as an e-commerce company, again, it's about understanding the norm, right? So Dollar Shave Club, I think, was like, well, shaving is an inherently kind of boring space, and is dominated by these kind of advertisements like Gillette that just have kind of sexy sports stars shaving in an incredible close-up with some beautiful woman standing behind them. And so they stood out. They did something entirely different, on the web, targeted to a different audience with a different tone. And it also, by the way, happened to kind of explain their proof points and their kind of USP. So it was really well articulated. But I think that's an example of where, it's trying to stand out. It's trying to do something a little bit different.
And you hit upon something very interesting that I've thought about a lot lately, which is you have to know the norm. And that's why this is a constant moving target. That's always, like you said, there's no set formula. So like, for example, nobody could do what Dollar Shave Club did today in 2016 because now it's been done and the bar has been moved. So,
and it was also a kind of a one of a kind thing in a sense. Again, there was so much talent that I think went into making that video that it's difficult to just replicate, quote unquote. Although I think that the Old Spice campaign also was kind of a similar format in a sense.
Now, what was that? In case people don't know about that.
I forget the name of the campaign now, but it was basically the short web videos of that guy, the Old Spice guy, responding to comments online.
Okay. Yep.
And he referenced all kind of memes, and basically it's kind of like topless guy in a bathrobe, but again, a very different style of marketing in a very colloquial kind of format, a very kind of a relatable format, again, designed for internet distribution. Sometimes that mirrored the Dollar Shave Club kind of style, not that they were the same campaign, but, a similar kind of going against the grain kind of format.
Right, totally. So the process mind in me is kind of thinking like if I was in a certain industry, I'd probably look at the top 10 or 20 sites or companies and just kind of make a list of literally what they're doing and then try to do something different than them. Kind of take an inventory of that. So awesome. Let's shift a little bit to startups. You also did an article on your blog, tomcritchlow.com. We'll link to this article about team building. You said something a little counterintuitive. You said startups have no idea what they're doing most of the time, and that's not a bad thing. So what does that quote mean?
Well, yeah, I think the point there is that almost the definition of a startup is that they don't know what they're doing because they're doing something new, right? I think if you look at the kind of formal definition of a startup, it's a business that hasn't figured out the business model yet, right? So they're explicitly optimizing for learning for new things. There are some startups that follow a pretty predefined model. And so you could say that they do know what they're doing in a sense. But I think for the most part, when we use the word startup, we kind of associate that with the idea of a company that's trying to do something a bit different. And so, it's a good thing that they don't know what they're doing because it means that they can challenge the norms and that they can do things in new ways. And I think I've seen this many, many times over and over with startups where it's like, the founder or the founding team or the CEO isn't running the company because they know what they're doing. They're running the company because they either have one specific area of expertise or just an overriding passion for the space. So, for example, Andy Dunn, who runs Bonobos, very popular, men's clothing startup.
I love their cords.
They have a really great brand. They, a lot of loyal followers, great exposure. Andy Dunn didn't know anything about selling pants before he got into that business, right? And so, he got into it because he was obsessed with the problem, and I think he also had an MBA and kind of saw an opportunity in the market and so on. But he didn't get into that because he had a deep experience in retail and fashion and wanted to translate that into a new business. And so by definition, he didn't know. I'm sure he had to learn a ton about retail, about fashion, and about clothing design and so on. But that's a good thing because it allows you to challenge the norm. So I think that was what I meant by that quote was kind of, you're constantly in the state of trying to learn new things and trying to do things in a new way, which translates into not really know what you're doing. But that's good. That's by design.
That's the whole point. Do you with your new, now give us a little quick background on your new freelance, what do you call it? A company? Like, tell us exactly what you're doing now with that. I know sort of what you're doing, but
it's a good question, and it changes a lot from client to client, which is why it's hard to define. That's one of the great freedoms of being independent is I can take on all kinds of different work. Some of my work is kind of marketing consulting in a way that you might expect. I've done some SEO work. I worked with the New York Times for a little bit on some projects. Most of my work is a little bit broader reaching. I do a lot of content strategy, content marketing work, whether that is helping to produce content or helping to set up teams that can produce content or helping companies kind of audit and understand their content strategies. That's a lot of work done there. And then some of my work is, advising startups. So, I've done work which kind of starts out in a marketing capacity, but has kind of translated into much more kind of mentorship, coaching, advisory. I would say that I have a bunch of different experience across the different bunch of different disciplines. Not that I know everything about everything, but a lot of that can be useful to startup founders and executive teams who, as mentioned, don't know what they're doing half the time. And so, that's also where my work has gone. Some of the work that I'm doing right now is interesting, is, starting to get into audience development and, kind of innovation pitches, which is kind of a new space, is companies that are looking explicitly for new ways of working or new ways of doing things, are trying to come up with processes and teams and projects that will move their organization forward or their ways of doing things forward. And that's especially true for media organizations where the ground is shifting below their feet. Facebook and Snapchat and all this kind of stuff is literally kind of shifting sands, right underneath them. And so trying to get involved in some of that work is interesting for me. But again, it's very difficult to nail down because so much of my work is, varies from one client to the next.
Okay, I want to talk about that media company stuff in a second. I'm glad you mentioned that you've been advising startups, because I wanted to tie that back into your quote about startups. And as you're advising them and consulting with them, do you see any big mistakes that startups are making right now in terms of their marketing? Or anything that they're just missing?
It's difficult to generalize, again, because so many different startups are unique. I think one of the classic marketing mistakes that startups make is not getting close enough to their user base. I think that there is, again, this kind of archetypal, I'm not quite sure how you say that. The traditional model of a startup, or the traditional idea of a startup, involves an engineering team that builds a product that scales to millions of users, right? Or some variation therein of a kind of a core engineering team that builds some kind of product or something in a new way. What I think that traditional model misses is the idea that you can get valuable feedback from your audience and your users. And so I think a lot of early stage teams are just, especially because they're designed to build something new, right? When a startup initially forms and initially starts, they're trying to do things in a new way. And so user feedback and user research isn't always that useful, because you're trying to make something that's different, which is good. But you quickly run into the problem that you have built a culture and an environment that is insular, is kind of inward looking, and always trying to build things that people might want, rather than using the kind of feedback loop of real users, real customers, to understand how they use your product, what they really want. A lot of startups don't have any notion of personas. They don't really understand the market segments. They don't understand the need states and the desires of those users. And so that's kind of, I would say, probably one of the biggest mistakes, in a sense, that's generalizable across a lot of startups, is just not getting close enough to their audience and their user base to really understand what is driving them, what is making them tick. And that can both be from a product perspective. So what new features do you need to build? What new data points and so on, or it can be on a content perspective. What kinds of marketing do you need to do to them? What kind of messaging do you need? How do you talk to your users? And all of that you can get a better understanding just by talking to them and hanging out with them.
Got it. So I want to jump to the media company thing. So explain a little bit more about the work you're doing with media companies. This part I personally find very fascinating. So I think we'll have a good chat about that.
Yeah, sure. I think, again, I've said this a lot, but it's hard to generalize just because every situation is different. But I think that, media companies as a whole have just gone through such a dramatic reinvention over the last, however many years, 5 years, 2 years, 6 months, 2 weeks, basically any time period you give me, they've gone through a dramatic reinvention. There are new technologies and new things happening all the time. I mentioned Facebook Live video earlier. You've got the Facebook Instant Articles, Google AMP. All of these things are just dramatically shifting the landscape right underneath us. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of twofold. One is there are some kind of best practices of the new web that we can bring to media companies. So a lot of media companies are just behind the times, whether that's on an SEO front or a social media front or a technology perspective. There are lots of different ways of just being a little bit slow to adopt some of the new things. So that's kind of more of the kind of routine work, if you like, of saying, hey, these are the things that I see as best practice in the innovative companies. Here's how you can do them too. Here's the processes that go with them and the teams and so on. And then there are the companies that are forward-looking, are innovative, that are looking for more. They're looking for the cutting edge. They're looking for new things. And interestingly enough, actually, I think a lot of my experience in the SEO world and content marketing has really helped that. A lot of media companies are not set up to think about content distribution in the way that SEOs and content marketers do, right? The people that have been doing branded content and content for commercial clients for a long time, that world is very different to how media companies distribute content and how they think about audience. And so I think there's a really interesting kind of intersection of those two worlds that I'm trying to bridge and trying to bring a bit more of that to the different companies. I think there's one media company that I'm working with right now, which they produce a lot of kind of entertainment news and rely on essentially breaking news to drive their big hits. Their big kind of their hero content or their kind of what do you call it? Breakout content is driven by breaking news. Whereas I'm trying to bring a mindset of you can craft your own breaking news, you can craft your own breakout content, which is, I think, comes from a bit more of a content marketing world where you can kind of craft these things and produce them and set them free with a deliberate launch strategy and outreach strategy and so on. And so that's been really exciting and interesting is trying to, bring some of my thinking from the kind of business world or the branded content world over to media companies and try and say, hey, we can learn something here. A close friend of mine just went to go work at Quartz in their kind of branded content / creative services division. And, that's a fascinating world of Quartz as a media organization is trying to figure out how do we do content that people pay for? What does that look like? How much do people pay for it? What are our processes? Why are they paying for content on Quartz? Why is it better here than somewhere elsewhere? And that whole world is new. So again, I'm really excited to try and play in that space.
So you mentioned having some of these sites be the source of content, not just reporting on content is one thing. Is part of it also getting them to move more quickly and better over to social media platforms, to utilize platforms like Snapchat and live streaming video? And are you trying to help them get on those platforms? Is that a strategy?
I wouldn't say that that's been a big part of my work so far. I think there are some basics. It depends on the organization. Some organizations, for example, are just underperforming on a particular channel. So it's like, okay, here are some things that we can do to make sure that you have a better Facebook presence or a better presence on Twitter. For the most part, actually, I think it's much less about it's much less about the platform and it's much more about the content. It's much more about what are we doing that's interesting.
What are they publishing?
Yeah, why does anyone care about this content? And that will ring true whether it's on Snapchat or Facebook Live Video or Twitter. And so it's a bit more about trying to match up our kind of editorial strategy with our distribution strategy to make sure that the people that have interesting things to say are making them in the ways that people on those platforms want to consume.
So I always think of like a media company as the distributor in a sense. So how do you think of where their content's being distributed? Like,
it's a great question. Yes. So there was a really good article on Recode just a couple of days ago. I think it was called the Facebook unbundling or something like that. We'll add a link. And I think it was a CEO of Chartbeat that was writing the article and basically arguing that traditional media organizations did 5 things, and that now 4 of those 5 things are now done by Facebook. And I don't have the list to handy, but one of them is things like distribution. Facebook now basically handles discovery, distribution, engagement, and some other things. And I think that was a really great kind of point, is that it's kind of the unbundling of the media organization. What used to happen at somewhere like New York Times is you'd write, let's say, kind of investigative journalism, and that would bring people to the Times. People come to the Times, and then they would go to your entertainment news stories or whatever that are much easier to sell advertising against. And that whole model is just broken in a world of Facebook, in the sense that people come to the stream in Facebook, they dip in and out of individual articles, but there's very little retention or kind of browsing around. You don't go to an article from Facebook and then browse around the New York Times. A small number of people do, but an insignificant number compared to how they used to. And so that's kind of a real problem is when every single piece of content lives in a kind of isolated bubble, one link away from the Facebook stream. What does that mean for an organization like the Times? What does it mean for advertising? What does it mean for branded content? What does it mean for who pays for the real investigative journalism at that point that no one really wants to advertise against, right? The kind of the reporting against ISIS, for example. No one really wants to have their brand on that story, even though it's an important piece of content. That's an important story that the New York Times wants to write. But how does that get funded in a world where people come read it and then they bounce back. It's like that's a really interesting model, and no one's got the answers to that, I don't think, but that's part of what people are trying to figure out right now.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, sounds very... I'll let you handle that one, Tom. Sounds like very...
I'll let you know if I figure it out.
So I want to talk for a few minutes towards the end here about Fiercely Curious and maybe e-commerce in general. First of all, give us just a quick background on what Fiercely Curious is.
Fiercely Curious is an online art and design collective. We work with Brooklyn-based artists and designers to represent their work. That's everything from kind of fine art, photography, sculpture on the art side, and on the design side, a lot of furniture design, some jewelry, clothing, and so on. Again, everything made and designed in Brooklyn. And we run a website, fiercelycurious.com, where we have an e-commerce presence. We also do pop-up shows. So we don't have a permanent physical space, even though we're a local business, which is kind of an interesting and exciting twist on the model. It means we have much lower overhead, but it is also a challenge getting our brand out there. And it's a challenge running an e-commerce shop when a lot of our products are $1,000 plus. So we have big ticket items. You're both on the art and the design side. That's a tough sell. And so it's been interesting for us trying to tread that line between how do we drive offline interactions using the web. And so one of the things that's been successful for us is booking studio visits. Since all of our artists and designers are local, we can take customers or potential customers to the artist studio, use that as our kind of sales space, if you like, where they can meet the artists, see their work. And that's been exciting for us. One of the nice byproducts of that is that we have ended up doing a lot of custom commissions. So when a potential client comes to an artist studio, meets the artist, sees their work in progress, sees their process, it oftentimes naturally leads to them wanting a custom piece by the artist rather than something off the shelf that they've already made. Once they have that personal connection, their kind of brain starts turning, and they say, I would love a piece like this, but in this style or whatever. And so that's been really exciting for us, is just, fostering those collaborations and custom commissions, and kind of finding those collectors who are interested and willing to come and engage with the artist. The traditional art world, for the most part, has always hidden the artist away. The idea of you go to a gallery, you see the art on the walls, you meet the gallerist, but the artist is nowhere to be seen. We're very much trying to kind of turn that on its head and say, if you want to buy a piece of art from this artist, you should come and meet them. You should come to the studio. That's the fun. That's the magic in our eyes. And so that's kind of been exciting, trying to do things a little bit differently. Like I said, we've been in business about 2 years. We do some e-commerce, but we also foster some offline sales and do these pop-up shows. So
the specific question I had about this was, you just put, I think, the Facebook Messenger, is it?
Yeah. On
the site? Is there a reason why you did that? You're just trying to get some actual chatting happening? How's that been working out?
I just wrote a blog post about why and how I did that. But basically, I was using Intercom for a little bit, which is like a live chat solution. Which actually works pretty well, but the cheapest tier is $50 a month, which is a little steep for me for something that doesn't get a ton of usage. And I was just curious to play around with Facebook Messenger as a platform for engaging with clients and customers, specifically also on mobile. I feel like one of the really nice things about integrating Facebook Messenger as a kind of a customer support tool is that it's incredibly seamless and natural for the user, right? The user just opens it up in their Facebook app and they just chat as they would, right? It can be a persistent kind of always on conversation. Right. And that's really exciting for me is to have that kind of relationship. The problem with Intercom is that for the most part, they have to be on the website to chat with you, right? So if they chat and then they go away, they miss the conversation unless they come back to the website. And so what I like about this is it kind of takes the conversation to the user, to the customer a little bit more directly. I think it's a solution that I have is still has some quirks to iron out, and obviously doesn't work if a user doesn't have Facebook. So that's kind of one of the big barriers to entry. But I figure that most people have Facebook at this point, and that's kind of a price I'm willing to pay for. A price I'm willing to pay for just experimenting and trying out something new.
Got it. Cool. So other than the studio tours, is there anything else that you would highlight for the listeners that have been successful in terms of selling products for this type of site?
I guess some of our biggest drivers have been getting featured in design blogs. We've been featured in the New York Times, New York Post, Wall Street Journal, those kind of places.
And
every time
through connections that you had, or
a whole bunch. A lot of those come from trade shows. Actually, we'll go to an art fair, or we'll run one of our own events, and a journalist will come by and just decide to write about us. Interestingly, for the most part, getting picked up in I would say traditional media outlets like the Times has not been particularly lucrative for us. Getting picked up in design blogs like Design Sponge or similar, they've been much more effective in actually generating sales for us.
Interesting.
We got picked up by a random Swedish design blog. This is about a year ago, and sold, I think, 8 pieces of art through that one blog post.
Oh wow!
So that's kind of, again, it's really fun to be on the other end of that. I've been working on my marketing work. I've always been advocating for the kind of decentralized nature of power and influence on the web. That was the basis of my 2012 Moscom talk, was the idea that Tim Ferriss is more powerful than the Times, and that's fun to kind of see that come full circle, and for us to actually be on the receiving end of that has been really nice. So getting featured in design blogs and so on has been fun. That's a driver of sales for us. Our events are probably our biggest driver of sales. So we participated in like art fairs. We were at Art Basel in Miami at the end of last year. Those are good for us, but so much better for us when we run our own event rather than participating in some other kind of industry trade show. We've kind of rented out warehouse spaces in Gowanus and Brooklyn, and we'll run our own shows for our own parties. And that's been really effective for generating sales as well. It's obviously more expensive that way to kind of rent the whole space and get the booze and insurance and all that kind of stuff. But they're just so much better for branding and for engaging with our audience. So that's been good. And then the studio visits, those are kind of our 3 channels, if you like, that we sold work through.
Hey everyone, so I hope you enjoyed that interview with Tom Critchlow. I had to cut the recording off there because all of a sudden my audio started freaking out and sounding really weird, but we pretty much wrapped it up there, and Tom just shared some links that you can go check out. He is at tomcritchlow.com. That's TomCritchlow, just like it sounds, .com. And you can check out his art site at fiercelycurious.com. He's also on Twitter at Tom Critchlow. You can pretty much find everything else of his from there. And of course, you can check out the show notes at evolvingseo.com/wire. And that's it for today. I hope to see you next time on episode 21 of Experts on the Wire. Music by me.